How's everybody doing on this cold morning? We've got a few less folks up here this morning, so I'm hoping y'all will sing loud with me and help me out. So if y'all will stand, we're going to begin worship with "To God Be the Glory." To God be the glory, great things he has done. So loved he the world that he gave us his Son, who yielded his life an atonement for sin, and opened the life gate that all may go in. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord, let the earth hear his voice. Praise the Lord, let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father through Jesus the Son, and give him the glory, great things he has done. Oh, perfect redemption, the purchase of blood, to every believer the promise of God. The vilest offender who truly believes, that moment from Jesus a pardon receives. Praise the Lord, let the earth hear his voice. Praise the Lord, let the people rejoice. Oh, come to the Father through Jesus the Son, and give him the glory, great things he has done. Great things he has taught us, great things he has done, and great our rejoicing through Jesus the Son. But purer and higher and greater will be our wonder, our transport when Jesus we see. Praise the Lord, let the earth hear his voice.
somebody else. Welcome to Mount Salem. We're so glad that you have chosen this as your place of worship today. If you are a guest, you're an honored guest. We'd love to have a record of you being here. So please take out the inside portion of your worship folder, fill it out for us, and place it in the offering plate. We'd love to see how your day was here and how great Katie did. All right, and then we'll maybe give you guys a contact to this evening, and so you can tell us a little bit more about yourself, and we can maybe answer some questions about Mount Salem as well. So please fill that out. Like also any prayer requests, any change of addresses, any kind of things that deal with emails or anything like that. Please put those in there and place it in as well, so that we can make sure that our rosters and all of our information and stuff is up to date. Today we do have a special guest speaker. Katie Hall is going to be speaking to us about her trip to Israel, which the church helped fund and helped send her on. So she's going to be giving us all the information on that. There'll be a Q&A time afterwards after she gets done. So there's no preaching today, all right? So you get to spare. Okay. But I'm sure that the word got out about that. Kids, the attendance, okay? So there will. I'm not going to try to tack on top of that. And so also it's spring break for our college and stuff and the university, and so Taylor and all headed down to Disney World and stuff. So be in prayer for Elizabeth. She's opened up the fort all by herself. That means all of you guys have got to sing extra loud. It's all hymns. Everybody should know them. Give her good support. All right. Last thing is to let you guys know about our Annie Armstrong Easter offering that has started. Our goal is $1,500, so please be mindful of that. We're not up to the point of being able to light a candle yet, which is one for every $200 for us as we get to our goal, so we're still under $200. It's early in the process. We understand that. Easter's not till like the third Sunday in April, so we have a few weeks to get that going and stuff, all right? So be mindful of that. Then, also on the inside of your worship folder, I'm not going to go through them today, but begin to look at all the things. We've had a lot going on here at the church up through yesterday. Our yard sale for the WU profited $900. Also, this coming week, we're going to have our parking lot paved. So when you come back next Sunday, that'll all be not fresh asphalt and everything on our parking lot. So there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of preparation that's being done. So there's a few weeks of that, and then it gets back intense again with a lot of activities and stuff starting back in April, all right? So please be mindful of that. That's all the inside of your worship folder. Did I miss anything? All right. Let me pray for us, and we'll continue on in worship. Father, we just praise you for the opportunity to be in your house today. What a beautiful day outside, and what a glorious day inside. Father, we just praise you again for how you take care of us, how you provide for us each and every day of our lives. Father, we pray that everything that we do here today through our song, Father, just be with Katie as she speaks and shares with us, and I'm sure the time of her life being able to go over to walk where you walk and to see the things that you saw. And Father, be able to help us to see through her today as she shares with us. And Lord, I pray that as we leave this place today and we go out into this world, that we'll be constantly reminded that you are always with us. You will never leave us or forsake us. So Father, use us for your glory in this world. These things we ask in Christ Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, if y'all will stand, we're going to continue worship with Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love. Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. 'Cause Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God, He to rescue me from danger interposed His precious blood. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let that goodness now, like a fetter, bind my wandering heart to Thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for Thy courts above.
Can everyone hear me? Yay! Okay, awesome. So I just want to start off by saying thank you again. Words cannot express how thankful I feel towards you guys for helping me to go to Israel. The extent of Hebrew that I learned was Boker Tov, which means good morning, Ahi, which means brother. Our bus driver was a gentleman, so we always said Boker Tov Ahi when we got on the bus. And then Sababa, which was amazing. So at the restaurants, when they would ask you how their food was, you would always say Sababa and like be really excited. So that's the extent of the language that I learned. But yeah, I'm just going to go through day by day what we did. I was not able to fit all of the pictures that I took onto the slides, so if you want to see more pictures, I'd be glad to bring my computer the next time I come and we can go through them. But yeah, so okay, so this picture just shows vaguely our route. So we arrived in Tel Aviv, which is where the red airplane is, and we went up through Netanya, over into Tiberias, which is the Sea of Galilee area. Spent the majority of our time in the Sea of Galilee area and the Jerusalem area. So we went up, and our travels took us around the Sea of Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and then up into Jerusalem. And then from Jerusalem, we went back to Tel Aviv and flew out. So that's just a little route, some geography. So our departure and travel day, I would just like to say that I felt every single prayer. I'm not a frequent flyer, and so I was very nervous the night before, but from the time of getting on the plane in Atlanta to our connecting flight in Boston, I was not anxious at all. Like, I was sitting with my friend and I was telling her, I was like, Haley, I'm not nervous. And I don't know why, because this is an 11-hour flight across the middle of the ocean. But I could definitely feel your prayers and the peace of God as we were traveling. We only had one kid get sick. He got dehydrated. But it couldn't have happened to anyone better because he was the happiest person on our team. And so he was smiling after passing out in the cabin. So that was just fun and interesting. So the first day that we arrived in Tel Aviv, and we arrived in about the evening time. And so from Tel Aviv, we traveled through the outskirts of the city, and so we were able to see some buildings. There was a Toyota building, which I thought was interesting because Mom works at Toyota. So I took a picture and I was like, it's even in the Middle East. And so then we went up and we stayed a night in Netanya, which is right on the Mediterranean Sea, and that was gorgeous. You could actually see the curve of the earth from where we were standing. And there were people surfing and just having a great time, and the city was really cute. It was a mainly Jewish city, so a lot of Hasidic Jews, so they had the top hats and the curly hair that came down. And so that was just interesting. That was kind of like our first interaction with Jewish people and the ultra-religious Jewish people. So yeah, those are just pictures of the sunset. The picture far off to my left, your right, it's hard to see, but that's the skyline of Tel Aviv as we were driving by. And then the bus is a bus of a professional basketball team that was in the airport while we were there. And it was the Israeli basketball team. So we didn't get to meet any of them or see any of them, but it was a really big deal that the bus was there. Our tour guide talked about it for quite a while. So that's just a close-up picture of the sunset. We actually got to watch the sun disappear over the horizon. So it was just breathtaking to start off the day with, or to start off our trip with just standing in God's creation, watching the sun disappear in a country that none of us had ever been in except for our professors. So the next day started our very busy trip of visiting lots of sites. We started off in Caesarea Maritima, and this is where one of Herod's castles, one of many of Herod's castles, was. And so, let's see. The picture next to me sitting and squatting, that is part of what was his palace. That is his swimming pool that is still standing. And the palace actually went out into the sea. And so Paul most likely was in this palace before he went to Rome. The picture of me squatting, I'm squatting on a Roman toilet. It was part of the amphitheater in the Herodium where they do all the gladiator games, and that's where they did that. And so that was their plumbing. And then the picture of me standing on the rocks is just me standing in front of the Mediterranean Sea. And then the amphitheater was just gorgeous. It probably extended a lot higher than the picture I have, and seated hundreds of thousands of people in Jesus's time and even before him. And the sign that's down in the bottom corner, you can't read anything on it because it's in Hebrew, but it's an extremely important sign because it is the only New Testament reference in Israel. And that's a big deal because the Jewish people do not believe in the New Testament. So for them to allow someone to come in and refer to the New Testament and refer to Jesus, it's just a really big deal. And our tour guide made sure to emphasize that to us, how important it was that sign was there, because every Jewish person that would come to visit Caesarea Maritima was exposed to the New Testament and the power of Jesus Christ. And so that we were just standing there like, wow, like the fact that there's just a New Testament sign is such a big deal in this country. So from there, all on the same day, we traveled to Megiddo and Mount Carmel. So we went from Caesarea Maritima and we traveled up to Mount Carmel, which was where Elijah and the prophets and the fire came down. And you can literally see the entire nation of Israel from the top of Mount Carmel. So I can only imagine what it was like when the fire came down, the entire nation being able to look up and to see that fire and to know that something happened. And so it's just crazy. You can actually see Caesarea Maritima in the picture next to where I'm standing. If I would have zoomed in a lot further, you would be able to see the towers, the modern towers that they have now in Caesarea Maritima. So really, you got an entire view of the nation of Israel. And then Megiddo, in Hebrew, it sounds like Armageddon. So when you pronounce it in Hebrew, it's similar to Armageddon. And so many believe that this is where the last battle is going to take place. That's in Revelation 16:16. But it was just a place that Solomon lived at one point. There is a Canaanite altar that's still standing, which is what that picture is. It's the round rocks in the middle. And just over time, people have excavated it, and archaeologists have discovered that it is a Canaanite altar. And so that was really interesting. There used to be like thousands and thousands and thousands of horses that lived with Solomon. So we got to see the remnants of the stables for his war horses and things like that. So that was really interesting as well. The next day, we went to Tel Dan, which anytime you see the word tel, it means mount or mountain. So this is where Micah spent most of his time, and this is actually the only place that they have found an authentic golden calf, which then further proves the story in the Bible of Micah and turning towards just worshiping of idols. And from Tel Dan, we could actually see Lebanon, and it was kind of intimidating because as we went around the trail, and so where the altar is, which is the picture on your left, just stepping a few hundred feet forward, you're in the buffer zone, and if you go just a few hundred feet more, you're in Lebanon, and that's a really big deal, and they get really angry. So it was just we were standing there and just pondering on the war that's been going on and the disputes that happen constantly. And we are there visiting these sites and learning about these sites. And, it's just, there's a lot of war going on. And we just felt very honored that we were able to be there. So, yeah, actually the picture of the mountainscape that's kind of in the middle, that's Lebanon. But probably about the middle of the picture, right under the mountain from perspective, is where their land started. And everything before that is the buffer zone. And then we went to Caesarea Philippi, which is where the gates of hell are. And this is where Jesus was telling Peter the little R rock story and the big R rock story, and asking him, who do people say that I am? And it was interesting to learn the history of that area. And the reason it's called the gates of hell is because during Jesus' time, there were still human sacrifices going on, and they would offer people to their gods and throw them in the cave. And if blood ran down the river, then the gods were still angry. And as you can imagine, the cave is right above the river, so often there was blood running down the river, and so they just continuously were sacrificing their people to appease the gods. And so it was just for Jesus, and while Jesus was alive and doing his ministry, that was still happening. So he's in the area, and they're still sacrificing humans. And for us, foreshadowing in hindsight, we know that Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice, and our ultimate sacrifice was standing in an area where people were offering each other to gods that weren't there. And so, again, it was just one of those moments where no one really had much to say. We just kind of walked around and took it all in. Then we went to Mount Bental, which this was more of a historical site. We could see Syria, we could see abandoned Syrian tanks from when they tried to invade Israel, and then they were stopped, and they didn't come back for them. So in the picture of me and my friend Madison, the wind is obviously blowing very hard. That was a crazy day, because when we got to the top, so it could be like warm and mild down at the bottom, but the minute you go up to the top of the mountain, it's freezing. And it hailed on us, but it wasn't like massive hail, it was like little pellets of hail. And the wind was blowing really hard, and we all got cut up from the hail and from how hard the wind was blowing. I had cuts on my hand for a few days, just trying to get back to the bus. So that was interesting. That had never happened for my professor, so he was like, "That was awesome! That's never happened before." So it was just really cool, and just to see the landscape, and again, to see another country. Yeah. And then we went to Tabgha, which is kind of dedicated to Jesus feeding the 4,000, and it's in the Galilee area. So at this point, we are in the Galilee area. We're staying in Tiberias. And so the courtyard with the tree, that is the church that is dedicated to the feeding of the 4,000. And it has this beautiful mosaic on the floor that was handmade hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And it's just 2 fish and loaves, and it's just extremely gorgeous because it's handmade and it still lasted this long. They don't let anyone get near it or touch it, rightfully so. But yeah, and so the majority of the souvenirs in the Tiberias area and even throughout Israel is of that mosaic. They just reprinted and put it on things. The church in the top is a church dedicated to Peter, and the majority of these churches are Catholic churches. That is the Christianity that is over in Israel. It's either Orthodox or Catholic. And so the bedrock that's at the very bottom of the church, the Sea of Galilee, used to come right up to the church. So they built the church on the Sea of Galilee. But since then, the water has receded. And then Bethsaida was just another historical site that we went to that has some ties to Israel, and we got to see. This site was better, it was preserved better, so it was easy to imagine what life would have been like living there. The houses were you could tell where they were, and marketplaces and the roads. So for us, it was easy to imagine, okay, like this is how the daily life would go. They would walk from here to here, and then, so that was interesting as well. So to continue our stay in Tiberias, we went to the Mount of Beatitudes, and the church in the middle that has all of the arches, that is the Church of the Beatitudes, and that was by far my favorite church. The architect built it in a way, it's another Catholic church, but the architect built it in a way that natural light could reach every part of the church. In most Catholic churches, light only hits the, I don't remember the word for it, but it's like a podium. It's like the most important part, like when you walk in, you like pray towards it. But he wanted natural light to hit every part of the church. So it's shaped in an octangle, so it has 8 everything, and it's literally overlooking the Sea of Galilee. And so it was stunning, and we got there really early, so there weren't a lot of tourists, and it was very quiet, so we got a lot of praying time and reflecting time. And as you walked towards the church, on the sidewalk, it was the 8 Beatitudes written in English, and then they also had them written in Greek. And then also in the church, in the ceiling, they were written in Greek. So it's just a really pretty, quaint church. I actually, for my project, did a recreation painting of this church. So yeah, and then the 2 pictures on the end are at Capernaum, and the first picture, which would be on your left, is of the synagogue that is believed to have been standing there when Jesus was there. And Capernaum was Peter's mother-in-law's home. So Jesus, it's believed that Jesus spent a lot of time here, that instead of walking all the way back to his home, he would just walk to Capernaum when he was doing his ministry around Galilee, and just stay with Peter's mother-in-law. But the synagogue, it was interesting because some of the majority of the sites they had to fix up and kind of like guess what it would look like, just so that it wouldn't be like this tall. But they actually, in the ancient times, they had to rebuild it before, and they built on top of the natural stairs. So as you're going up the stairs to it, you see really, really old rock, and then the new rock is cut around the old rock to preserve how ancient it was. They didn't want to take away from the original synagogue, which was extremely interesting to us. And then the picture in the middle is on our Sea of Galilee boat ride, which was a very interesting time for me. We had to, each student had to give a devotion while we were on the trip, and we had to choose a New Testament site and give a devotion on that site. And so I did it on the Sea of Galilee boat ride. So they took us out, and we went about like halfway, and then we came back. And that day it was really windy. It had rained almost every day at this point. And so the waves were like bouncing. Even though it's a lake, it definitely felt like an ocean. And so I'm giving my devotion, and all of a sudden the boat turns, and the entire right side of the boat goes underwater. And everyone else is sitting, and they have something stable they're holding on to. And I'm standing in the middle of the boat, and I'm watching chairs go sideways. Like everything is rolling across. And I was like, at least I could say I swam in the Sea of Galilee. But I was not excited for that because it was cold. But fortunately, I did not fall in. I kind of just like held my ground. And we were all like, okay, I'm glad we all survived that. Everyone's here. Head count. But it was just really interesting and crazy. The wind was crazy. Obviously, a storm was coming in. But yeah, it was still really fun. It's a great story. I did not swim in the Sea of Galilee. Maybe next time when it's warmer. And then the very last picture is of what is believed to be the first Christian church in Capernaum. And what they did was they built a Catholic church over the area, and then made the floor glass so you could see the building. And it starts off, you can actually tell where they added onto it because it's a small rectangle, which would be the average size of a house for someone living during Jesus' time. And then it kind of expands, and then there's like a hallway that leads into the little square, and then it expands again, and there's another hallway. So that's believed to be the first Christian church, and it was Peter's mother-in-law's house. So that was really interesting as well. And it was just, like I said before, the majority of the churches in Israel are Catholic just because of the conquering that happened in history, but they did a really good job of preserving these sites and expressing the importance of these sites. And so I think that can be appreciated, and I think that churches in America, yes, we have some really pretty churches and churches that are all for Jesus Christ, but we lose the lordship of Jesus Christ. And I think that these churches in Israel really captured the lordship of Christ, which I enjoyed. So then we went to Kursi and the Jordan River. Kersey is where Legion was cast out of the pigs, and it looks exactly how the story describes it. You look up, and there's a mountain from the city. You're looking up from the city, and there's just one mountain that is right above the Sea of Galilee. So the story makes perfect sense. Legion is cast out into the pigs, and the pigs go into the water. It's just obvious. And so that was really cool to see that and to finally put an image in my head of like what that story was, and for all of these places. It was just exciting. We had a girl that was giving her devotion, and I should have been listening, but I was just standing there like, this is so real. And it's just right there in front of you. And then the middle picture is my feet in the Jordan River. I did not go all the way in because it was freezing. We did have a few students recommit their faith, 3, and were rebaptized in the Jordan River. So that was really exciting and really cool. The Jordan River is not very big, and the majority of it is extremely tiny that runs through the nation of Israel. But it does feed the Sea of Galilee, and it does feed the Dead Sea. It just doesn't come back out of the Dead Sea. So it enters from the Golan Heights, which is the top of Israel, into the Sea of Galilee, and then from the Sea of Galilee it runs out into the Dead Sea, and then that's it. It doesn't go anywhere else, which explains why the Dead Sea is in fact dead. But so then from there we went to Cana, Nazareth, and Bet Shean. And the picture of the church, that's Cana, and that's kind of dedicated to the wedding miracle. And so you walk in, and a lot of people get married there. It's a big deal to get married in that church. And then down in the bottom, there's lots of prayers of people writing prayers for their spouses or for the person they're going to get married to. And it's just thousands of letters poked into these holes in between the stones, or thrown in like over the glass, just to hoping that the Lord will bless their marriage. And then in Nazareth, that was a massive city. I was not expecting it to be as big as it was, but there is actually a decent amount of land that Christians have bought, and they recreate just what a day in the life of Jesus would have been like when he was in Nazareth. So you have the vineyard. The hole in the rock is actually a wine press, and based on research and archaeological research, it is believed that this would be a wine press Jesus would have used, and they would have used their feet. And does anyone know why they would have used their feet? Or want to take a guess? No? Okay, so they use their feet because your feet are soft enough, but not hard enough. Because if you squish the seeds in the grape, it makes the wine bitter. So they would use their feet to get the juice out, but it wouldn't crush the seeds to where the wine was bitter. So, yeah, hopefully you didn't have any toe jam. And then Beit Shean was just a Roman city, and a very big Roman city. And so we just visited there, and you could see Jordan, and yeah. And then the picture of me is just me on top of a little overlook that overlooks the city of Nazareth, like the outskirts of the city of Nazareth. Then from there, we traveled all the way down to the Dead Sea. And on our way to the Dead Sea, we stopped at Jericho. So we were able to stand on top of what was believed to have been Jericho, which is the picture off to your right. And the sandy mountains, that's the country of Jordan. So really, like, Israel is only about the size of New Jersey. So it is not very big. We could have actually traveled the entire nation in like 3 days if we wanted to, without stopping in major places. So we stood on top of it, and she read us the story of Jericho, and it was really cool. And then from there, we went to where the Qumran scrolls were found, or the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is Qumran. And that story is very interesting as well. A shepherd boy, long after the people that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls had died off and left the area, his sheep went missing, and he was pretty sure it fell into one of the caves. So he threw a rock down into one of the caves to scare his sheep out, and so he heard it hit, and then he heard a whole bunch of vases busting, and then his sheep ran out, and he was like, well, what's down in there? So he went down and he found all of these scrolls with scripture written on them, and went and told multiple people, and then as word spread, historians came and excavated it, and it just further proved the story of Jesus, which it was a really big deal because it was it historically went back further than any other manuscript we had. So it just further proved the Bible. And then we went to the Dead Sea and we spent one night there. You kind of felt like you were staying at a resort because the Dead Sea is kind of a big deal because of the mud that you can buy that's really good for your skin. So you can't really see in those pictures, but we stayed in like a hotel that was kind of like a resort there. They had a shopping mall with like strobe lights, and it was really crazy. So we didn't go into the mall that often. We waited until the crowd died down before we went in. And also, this area is just all desert, and so it's mainly a Palestinian area, so there weren't many Jews there. And then that's us floating in the Dead Sea. I did not believe that you actually floated. I was like, there's no way it's that easy. Something's going to happen. Someone's going to get it in their mouth, which was a really big deal. You don't want the Dead Sea water in your mouth. Our tour guide stressed that at least 500 times because of the mineral concentration and the salt concentration. And the bottom of it is just all dried salt. So many of us, as we were walking in, you wore shoes, but that didn't mean you didn't slip or like have to catch yourself. And so a lot of us left with like cuts on our hands. But because we were in the Dead Sea with lots of minerals, you just let it soak and it was healed. It was really cool. It was really interesting. But yes, you do indeed float, but you don't want to float too far because then you're in Jordan territory and they will come in a boat, and because you don't have your passport, they will take you back with them, and it's a really big deal. So we were like, I don't want to come back. Like the minute people started to get a little too far, we were like, we don't really have time to deal with that. So yeah. So from there, we only stayed one night, and then we traveled, and we kind of like were on our descent up to Jerusalem. So we stopped in En-Gedi, which is believed to be kind of like an oasis where David hid from Saul the majority of his time, and it was absolutely beautiful. It is just right, it's like I don't know, like just like a little divot in the mountains, and it's got fresh water. They don't really know where the fresh water comes from, and it's just green. And it would make total sense why David would want to stay there while he was hiding from Saul with some of his soldiers. And so the majority of these pools, it's like David's pool number 1, David's pool number 2. So it was really, really pretty. And there was actually the picture that is on your left. It's hard to see, but it looks like the ground is growing upside down, just the way that the moss and the leaves are growing off of it. So it was kind of trippy when you first walk up because you're like, that looks like the ground, but it's above me. But it was just really cool. And then we went to Masada, which was a ultra-religious Jewish town up on a mountain. It was my first ever cable car ride, which was extremely high. I did not open my eyes until we got to the top. It was, I may be dramatic, but it was terrifying. So we got to the top, and it's just a flat, big mountain with a palace that used to be Herod's palace, and then after he decided he didn't want it anymore, some ultra-religious Jewish people moved up and kind of just took control of it. And then when the Romans started to kind of conquer the land, you can actually see where there were Roman camps as you're looking out across the landscape. And that story is actually really sad. The Jewish people knew that the Romans were coming, but they didn't want to give up on what they believed was their land and give up on a lot of the Old Testament beliefs. So they kind of stood their ground, but it ended in the majority of them committing suicide because that was better than going into a Roman custody. So that was also one of those moments where we just had to stand there and just kind of like take that in for a minute of like, that's really sad, but So then we traveled to Bethany, which is a completely Palestinian city, and the culture is completely different. We went from having Jewish people around us that wouldn't even look us in the face to Palestinian people that were like, hi, wanted to be around you, especially sell you their little trinkets. And we actually had Madison, who was in the picture with me on Mount Bental. She had blonde hair and blue eyes, which is a really big deal because they don't ever see that. And so there were a lot of people that were like subtly trying to take pictures of her as we were on this trip, because they just never see people with blonde hair, blue eyes. And she also had a lot of the guys, like I said, the culture was very different in a Palestinian area. So a lot of the guys were like, hey! And so we had to like scurry along and kind of like surround her. Not because we felt unsafe, but just because it was uncomfortable. But so the picture that kind of just looks like a square in the ground, that's believed to be Lazarus's tomb. So that's where Jesus would have raised him. And so in that one, because it's in a strictly Palestinian area, the church that they built to it is a lot smaller than other areas. So we had to like go up this cobblestone road, and it was just like this little hole in the wall. And it was like Church of, I don't even remember the name, it was a really long